This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
May I have your attention, please? At this time, I'd like to take a moment to review our boarding process with you.
There is no escape. Don't make me destroy you.
The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural.
The Jedi Knights are all but destroyed, and yet your task is not complete, Inquisitor.
This is Ashley Eckstein, Ahsoka Tano from Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z.
Joining us for a cup of coffee today to talk about Star Wars Inquisitor Rise of the Red Blade is New York Times best-selling author Delilah S. Dawson. Delilah, welcome to Coffee with Kenobi.
Thank you so much. Am I allowed to have kombucha? Can I have kombucha with Kenobi? Is that allowed?
Ooh, I like that. It's
I feel like they would drink that on Tatooine, you know? Like, it just seems like it has that kind of dirty, half-alive feeling of most of the food there.
Yes, plus it's still got that alliterative nature. So I think that's perfect. I think that's absolutely perfect. Let's do it. So you are no stranger to writing epic stories, some of them Star Wars related. What was particularly compelling to you about Star Wars Inquisitor Rise of the Red Blade?
I mean, pretty much everything about it hits all of my my talking points for a thing I'd like to write. It's got a unrepentant female villain who is very violent. It's got being pretty upset with the larger strictures that hold us captive in society. I got to finally use the Force and lightsabers in my books, which in all of my previous books I wasn't allowed to really use either of those words, even on this lightsaber is on like every page pretty much. I got to write some of our favorite like canon characters. I got to write Anakin and Obi-Wan and the Emperor and Mace Windu and Yoda and everybody. So it was a super fun book to write. And also, I actually got to write more of a character-driven story. Phasma was told Scheherazade style about how other people see Phasma, and Black Spire was as focused on the land as it was the people. But this is a really kind of like tight character, emotional story, which is really fun to tell too.
I love that. And those of you listening, of course, can't see this, but Delilah has these awesome lightsaber earrings.
These are from Rock Love. Aren't they amazing?
Yes,
they're earrings.
It seems perfect to me. And you're also getting to write in this really wonderfully fun era of Star Wars too, because you get the Clone Wars and you get the post Order 66. So it's just such a great feast. I think that's my favorite era of Star Wars.
Yeah, it's a neat era to write in, and just that it's almost like American history. Like, we know everything that happened almost every day. We know what happened. So as compared to, when you're writing the sequels and you're like, who knows where people are and what's happening? We're not quite sure. It's like, they can tell me what happened on this day. I mean, there was one instance where, during the final edits of the book, someone pointed out like, oh, you've got her talking to this master on this day, and like, she real dead. So like I was like, okay, well, tell me who's alive, and then I'll have to, go study up on where they are right now. So it's very interesting, and just that, it's almost like if you're in a room filled with toys, like, we know where all the toys are right now and we can play with them exactly where they need to be. So it was neat to have that kind of structure.
Fantastic. So I like the idea of it being a big toy box. That's great. So what was the impetus for this specific story as far as the creation of a new character during this compelling moment in the timeline?
Well, she wasn't technically new. She was created by Charles Soule for his 2017 Vader comics, but she didn't have a name. She didn't have a number. We just had this one day of her entire life in which she did some pretty horrible things, and that's all we had to go on. So the thrust of the book was, what would it take to make a earnest, good-hearted Jedi fall to the dark side without, the things that we've seen before where they're tortured and broken, like Seventh Sister and Fifth Brother, or like, where Anakin had this super aggressive influence by Palpatine where we don't even know how he was being manipulated physically, mentally, emotionally. But we wanted to see a character who would enter the Clone Wars kind of very naive and wanting to do good. And from the crucible of this awful war and her interactions within the Jedi Order, would actively choose the Inquisitors and choose to hunt Jedi eventually.
Right, which she's pretty good at. So that actually leads me to a great little transition, because the summary of the book talks about the salvation of Order 66. That is not typically a point of view we think about when discussing the Emperor's ultimate plan. Talk about the change of perspective and the challenges you faced looking at Order 66 from this certain point of view.
Yeah, it was so fun. We, almost every point of this book, I got to say, we've seen all of these points of view. What haven't we seen before? How haven't we seen somebody attack Vader? How haven't we seen, the Emperor interact with someone? So I was always trying to do something unexpected that, as a super fan of Star Wars, like I haven't actually seen before. So Order 66, we have what was in the movies where we got, these glimpses of, Aayla Secura going down and Yoda being on Kashyyyk and whatever they were doing. But we hadn't yet seen what would happen that would allow someone to survive it outside of fighting. And not everyone survives this Order 66. But, in just considering if you have the potential to become an Inquisitor and in this strange little moment, the thought, how they would approach that, how you would be tapped. And, I think she says in that, where she suddenly realizes like, oh, we've all been sent out very far away from the Jedi Order, almost like it was on purpose to get us very separated when this happens. And because of that separation, she was able to get different orders and something different happened to her. Although, it was still pretty tragic and chaotic and traumatizing. It wasn't like they threw her a party and there was a surprise cake. But we do get to see how two different Inquisitors survived Order 66, and not strictly through, we've fought off the clone troopers, but through a different way.
Yeah, there's I don't want to give anything away. Coffee with Kenobi is very anti-spoiler. But there's some wonderful moments where there's, of course, an abrupt transition, because that's what Order 66 is in the galaxy. So you've got this lead character who suddenly is in a very different sort of a unit. I don't know. I just love the idea of her always wanting a family dynamic, and boy, it never really works out for her.
Yeah, that was a big part of her character too, was just, the idea of, we've seen all sorts of different Jedi who were maybe, I wouldn't say failed by the Jedi Order so much as disappointed by it, or unable to really reach their heights within it. But to take a character who really, every time you could have had a good thing or a bad thing happen, just by chance the bad thing happened. They take the Jedi, accept these children with these magical powers, and they raise them in this crush to be Jedi. But the flip side of that is that, children and babies have this intense need at a very young age to be loved unconditionally, and to be 20 inches from someone staring into their eyes, knowing that they are loved. And like, we always forget, like, the Jedi didn't get that. These are like orphanage children. Like, whoever is in the crush, I'm sure, is doing a lovely job, or maybe it's a nanny robot. But at no point does a Jedi look into, an adult's eyes and go, this is my adult who will keep me safe no matter what, and I am loved and I am cherished. They never get that. And you just start to think about all the other moments where a child would really need one loving adult who understands and loves them unconditionally, and they don't really get that. It's kind of heartbreaking from that point of view. It
really is. And I must say, Rise of the Red Blade did something. This is how I've been recommending this book to people and to listeners. I just say, look, I feel like I've spent an unhealthy amount of time thinking about Order 66, as all Star Wars fans probably have. How often do you see online when someone's ordering food and they get Order 66 and they post a picture of it, right?
I've been there.
Absolutely. So the great thing about Rise of the Red Blade is that it really looks at all of this, and it teaches you different ways to look at the psychology of what it means. And I'm really looking forward to asking you this: the problematic dogma of the Jedi Order, in which Jedi are supposed to, in essence, cast aside a part of their humanity in order to connect to the light side and become fully trained Jedi. We know that. So as an author, what are your thoughts on the challenges of this teaching, and how did it impact you when writing Rise of the Red Blade?
Yeah, so I've been going through some personal things over the last couple of years, and discovering that my children are neurodivergent and have different levels of ADHD and autism. And once you see that as a parent, you start to go, oh, everything that I told them was normal is not in fact normal for other people, but masking that I've learned over my life to hide that I'm really weird. And so I've learned that I know I have ADHD, I know I have synesthesia, I'm probably on the spectrum somewhere. And it just makes me think back to all the times in my childhood when I was told, be yourself, you're perfect the way you are. Don't do that, not that way, be this way. You're really weird, be very normal, be quiet, don't do that, don't do this. and how it increasingly felt like, a rat running through a maze, and every time you thought you knew where you were going, a wall would slam down. So you had to figure out how to contort yourself into this little box to be acceptable to, society in general, which still didn't work. Like, I had a really hard time making friends. So I put a lot of that into this character, into what it would feel like to be in the Jedi Order and kind of never feel like you belong there. When I was a kid, I thought I was maybe an alien because I felt like very different, like other kids knew how to behave and I didn't. And I wanted to show a character that feels that way too. And I mean, we know that the Jedi Order is made out of so many different species throughout the galaxy, but I wanted her in particular to feel othered and, like she doesn't ever really have anybody that she super connects with. She doesn't know anything about her species. So kind of every chance I could as a character, I tried to make her feel alienated from the Jedi Order, which, is pretty easy during a war where you've just taken some very peaceful diplomats and monks and been like, hey, guess what? We told you your whole life to spread peace, but now you got to go kill people and decide who gets to live and, decide who gets to die. And then afterwards, when you're like really upset from having killed all these people, we're going to be like, that's okay. The Force says it's fine. Like, rejoice, they're one with the Force. And you're just like, oh, that's not helpful. That is not how you teach people to grieve. So yeah, she was let down several times by the Order. And there's so many points at which if just one person had stepped in and be like, hey, I see you, I hear you, really talk to me about what's in your heart, like none of this would have happened and she might have been fine. But no one ever stepped in and did that. Even her master never really had that power with her. So it's kind of heartbreaking to know that like there are lots of kids that move through our actual world this way who they say that kids with ADHD receive like 100,000 criticisms by the time they're 14. Like there's this absurd, number of how much criticism that they get because they're too noisy. They ask too many questions. They're too talkative. They can't hold still. And it really hits on their self-esteem because the whole time they're going, oh God, like I'm broken, I'm wrong. And not like this system isn't made for me. Oh, it kills me.
You're speaking to me on a lot of levels because I'm a parent as well. I'm also a high school teacher and my wife's a high school counselor. So we're very aware of like the stigma and the reality. So I hadn't thought about your book from that perspective, but boy, you've opened up a lot of pathways for me as well. So thank you for that.
I tried to put that in like that's kind of what the dedication is saying is like,
yeah,
I think among Star Wars, there are a lot of us who were never normal and never really had the hope of being normal. And that's okay because we're awesome.
Amen to that. Amen to that. So one of my favorite parts about interviewing authors is they can pronounce to me the names of their characters. Because Star Wars, as you know, can be very phonetically challenging because it kind of has its own set of rules, which is super fun. So is it Iskat Akaris? Is that right?
Well, whatever is in the audiobook is going to be the official pronunciation that Star Wars has officially chosen. And I haven't listened to the audiobook because I cannot listen to my words being read out loud because I'm like, oh no. So if you really want to know the truth, listen to the audiobook and whatever, the wonderful audiobook reader has done, Kristen Sia, is going to be official. In my head, it's Iskat Akaris.
Okay.
But I don't know if that's real or not. But I also firmly believe like there are different ways to pronounce things. If you hear it a different way in your head, like that's fine. I'm not going to come to your house and slap your hand. It's cool.
Leia. I mean, right? That's a classic part. So what makes Iskat so important to the overall Star Wars story?
I think that she is important because we've seen a lot of, we haven't seen as many females in Star Wars as males overall in general. So, we've seen Ahsoka has a really great story. And, we've also seen stuff with Barriss Offee and some of the different female Jedi, but we haven't seen this close of a point of view of a female Jedi. We haven't seen an Inquisitor have this, very kind of detailed emotional fall from good to evil before. The book does lay bare some, probably thoughts on the Jedi and how they maybe fumbled up the Clone Wars. I don't know. It's always just important for me that we see strong, powerful women. And, even if ultimately she's an evil murderer, when she's young, she has the best intentions and is trying her hardest. But the more of these personal stories we see and the more points of view we see within Star Wars, I feel like it gives us all a chance to see ourselves in Star Wars and to see different journeys and to connect with different characters.
And I think a triumph to me, if I could speak for you as an author, is that every time she kills someone, I never even know there's very clear reasons why, and the emotion is very raw. I always feel like the tragedy is more her because of how she kind of loses a little bit of a piece of herself. Like, even though she's great at killing and she's very adamant about owning that, and the way you choreograph the fighting and through the words is beautiful. But I really think that's so effective. Like, whenever I read Vader killing someone who's, has every reason to be, he's very sad. And I love when he shows up in the book and how you describe his abilities in the Force. I really think it's masterful how you talk about her killing and just the way it kind of impacts her, or she says that it doesn't. I just think it's amazing.
Thank you. We did have some discussion internally, and that when we got to those scenes, and I don't remember who said it in the comments because there are 17 people in the comments of a Star Wars book, but somebody said, we'd like to maybe see some more blocking, some more actual actions. And I was like, she's in flow, and I don't think that she's thinking of those. This is like a ballet. This is like painting. This is when you're not aware of what your body is doing. And so the way that I described it, I think, is the way that she is feeling it. So it's less like she did a diagonal slash from left to right across his trachea, and more like she's this spinning, whirling, beautiful thing when she's killing. She isn't thinking about jab, cross, hook, cross. She's just swirling. And like, they let me keep it in that way. But it was done on purpose because like when she's killing, like that's when she's happy.
I'm glad because it reminded, when I was reading it, these sections, I would think about when you see a video or something in person, somebody just like throwing a bunch of paint on the wall, and you step back and like, whoa, look at that. Because they're not thinking it. It's just a rhythm. Like
before
writing.
I was a writer, I was a visual artist and I painted murals, and that was my first access to flow. I would start painting on a wall, and it was like 8 hours later, I would wake up and be like, oh my God, who did this? But that's what it felt like. I wasn't aware of it. I was so inside of it. It was like I fell through the walls. That's exactly what I was going for.
That's super cool. Well, mission accomplished, my friend. Wow, that's great. So let's talk about the legacy characters. We just brought up Vader briefly. I know you mentioned it earlier in the show, but what legacy characters are the most exciting and or intimidating to write?
I mean, Yoda's the most intimidating. There's a full document on how to write Yoda speak, and it is not what you think it is, because it's like it's anything where when you hear Yoda, you hear the Yoda speak. You don't hear the 75% of things he says that are normal speak. You only remember the backwards twisted Yoda speak. So that was a very challenging one for me, and probably like when I write Han, he doesn't get edited. Everything that comes out of his head is perfect because he's lived in my head my entire life. But when I write Yoda, it's like, oh, dial it back a bit. You're a little too Yoda there. You're a little too Yoda. I'm like, but that's what he would say. And you're like, so yeah, Yoda was intimidating. I really enjoyed I got to piggyback off Mike Chen's Brotherhood and Anakin's knighting ceremony, which means I not only got to sneak in a little bit of Anakin, but a little bit of Obi-Wan as well. I really liked the thought of, what would this kind of been if Obi-Wan had been her master? Because like maybe he failed Anakin in some ways, but like I could see where they would have gotten along better. So those were super fun. And then there's a scene with several scenes with Emperor Palpatine and his different guises that were super fun too, that seemed to come more naturally, just because I've been here. Like he has one way as a senator and one way as like the creepy old Sidious man. So it was very fun.
It was fun for me.
Seventh Sister was fun too.
Oh boy, you really had fun with her. Like I recently watched the finale of season 2 of Rebels, and I, after reading Rise of Red Blade, so my perspective of the Seventh Sister was a little bit different. She's so sadistic.
Yeah, I got to. I mean, we don't spoil, but I can hint. I can tell you, if you read this book, you'll find out why she uses secret droids.
That's right.
Answer that question. And then Fifth Brother is super fun. I got an early copy of Sam Magg's Battle Scars, so I could have some more insight into his personality.
Cool.
But he's just he's like that perfectly grumpy character that's super fun because just everything he says is like really funny to everybody except him.
Yes. Yeah, I think I've worked with people like that. Yeah, for sure. Now, it's Star Wars. So they're going to be, you mentioned Mike Chen's book. We don't want to give too much away naturally, but what Easter eggs did you sprinkle in Inquisitor Rise of the Red Blade that you can share?
Yeah, so it's really important for me that my books are open doors to canon. Any of my books, if you've never read another Star Wars book, as long as you've seen whatever movie it's based around, like you'll be fine. So for this, if you've seen the prequels or the Clone Wars or the Kenobi show, like you don't need to read any books at all. And like for Phasma, you only need to have seen The Force Awakens for it to make sense. So yeah, so first of all, if you are new to Star Wars books, do not be intimidated. This book is for you. That being said, if you're a longtime fan, I love putting in Easter eggs. I mentioned sand in every book because Anakin's sand scene always cracks me up. I got to bring in some really fun older species that you don't see a ton from the earliest movies that it was fun to kind of expand on with them. Let's see, we got to show a new way to defeat Darth Vader because
Yes.
that's definitely challenging. So they're like, oh yeah, she has to fight him, but she can't die. And you're like, oh, greatest fighter in the entire galaxy. Cool. I'll put this teenager up against him.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, so there's definitely stuff like that. But I mean, one of the funnest parts were just, I love finding weird old species and bringing them back into canon. Like I brought a pink pachydermoid back in my Leia and Holdo comic, that sort of thing. So if you like those old weird species, I've got bunches of them in here.
I had to get out some of my alien books, like that have the different, and like, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I also love
Wikipedia is every writer's best friend, pretty much.
Oh yeah, I agree. I also like how, because when we're getting up to the Vader and Emperor stuff, I was thinking, now how you do such a great job showcasing sort of the power levels, almost like a video game, but certainly not that cartoony. I love how you differentiate between the power of Palpatine and Vader. I won't say details, but I really thought that was masterful.
Oh, thank you. I love that line. I'm so glad they let me keep it. Oh, and you know what else? If you were a fan of Knights of the Old Republic, as I was, there's also some Easter eggs from that in here too, if you're curious about where Exar Kun and his buddy Revan came from. There's some of that. So yeah, I'm it's all in there.
Yes,
And especially
definitely.
if you like Matt Stover's Revenge of the Sith book, there's a lot of that DNA in here too.
Yeah, I caught that as well. That's great. So obviously your love of this franchise and these characters really comes to life in the novel and in our conversation. What are some of the more compelling aspects of the Inquisitores program to you?
There are things that I still don't know that I wasn't allowed to show in the book. I think I've said this online before. If there's something that you're reading a Star Wars book, and you're like, why didn't they show such and such? Because we weren't allowed to. We wanted to. Star Wars is like a pie, and different people get different pieces. And TV and movies always get the bigger chunks. So if you notice something in this book that you're like, why didn't you show me that? Someone will soon, I'm sure. I can't wait to see it either. So yeah, there's things that I would like to know too. But it was kind of fun trying to explain, the things that we saw in Charles Soule's Vader comics, which is, that's the most we've seen of day-to-day Inquisitor life up until this book. So, it's like I don't have like absolute plans of the headquarters, so I had to kind of figure that out from Charles Soule's book and describe what we see in there and try to connect all the little chunks that we see as disparate rooms, and explain the things that you see therein and what the day-to-day inquisitorial life is. It's very fascinating the way that the rule of the Sith seems to influence Inquisitor life and how they can and cannot be together. Like as a group, they don't want them to be chummy, which you think you would, but they do not. So it was a really interesting thing to write. I've never written a world like that before with rules like that before. Because it doesn't make sense to me. But right. I've never been evil and focused everything I have on not getting taken down by my lessers, so I just don't think that way.
Right. Well, yeah, it's very much a survival of the fittest, and it's like a Funhouse Mirror version of a fraternity.
There's hazing, lots of hazing.
Yes, there's definitely hazing. You kind of touched on this. I'm curious if you have anything else to add. What do you think would have happened to Iscott if she had a Jedi Master like Obi-Wan or Qui-Gon?
I mean, I feel like, oh man, she and Qui-Gon would have been like, they'd have been so tight.
So fun.
Yeah, it would have been great. Yeah, if you read the book, she was chosen by her master for a very specific reason, and it may not be the correct one. So, she has an uncomfortable relationship with her master and has never felt close to her. And she looks at other kind of like warm, friendly relationships around her with her, her cohort and their masters. And it's like, why can't I have that? What would that be like? And you get that feeling that if there was someone in her life who actually saw her for who she was instead of what they need her to be, that she could bloom on her own and be a different kind of person. And, maybe she would have found other less dangerous fortes, like even if, in this case, she as you've already said, she finds out that her talent is killing, but you're like, there's a lot of other things that you can do with those skills. Like you could be clearing a jungle of poisonous vines. You could be, hunting, Nexu cats that are killing children in orphanage. Like there's all of these things you could be doing with your lightsaber that are not murdering people. And no one ever was like, hey, you know what? Let's find a good place for you. They were like, oh no, just don't use your lightsaber. You don't need that.
Yeah.
So,
but build one anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's have it, know how to use it, but like don't enjoy it too much.
Yeah.
If someone had seen her and helped her, hone her skills, find what she was good at, but they wanted her to fit into a very specific box. I mean, it's almost, like when you put a watermelon into a heart-shaped box and you force it to grow into a heart, like watermelons don't want to be hearts.
No.
They made her do that.
And it's also such a wonderful paradox because everything they use to help train her as a Jedi is based on fear. And that's supposedly not the Jedi way.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, more like control. I don't think they're actually scared of her, but I think that they do want to control her and contain her. I mean, it's like putting a cat into a box to take it to the vet. Like the cat doesn't want to go in the box.
Right.
You're not going to like it when they come out of the box, but while they're in the box, you're like, all right, problem solved.
Right. Yeah, I guess fear, not that they're scared of her, but more like they're afraid that there's like a dark side pull because they've got this past that they won't tell. It's like parenting again. Everything's about parenting apparently, where you're like, it's a fine line if you're worried about sometimes it's best just to be honest and open with your child.
Yeah.
And kind of work through it together.
Lies and hiding things don't seem like they ever work, but that's what most of our modern media is based on, because that's what the story is. If you're just open and honest from the start, there's not really that much of a story other than like, we had a good relationship, an okay childhood, now I'm a functional adult, and that's not what most of us get.
No, that's very true. So your introduction was quite moving and personal to me. I mentioned earlier, I'm a high school teacher. I know a lot about a lot of the challenges that people face, especially younger people. So this is not a question as much as is a thank you for your vulnerability and strength in sharing this.
Yeah, I'm really appreciative that they let me do the author's note to speak about that stuff, and that I got to write the dedication as well. Star Wars, the people behind Star Wars, the Star Wars editors at Del Rey Books, my editor Tom and senior editor Elizabeth, they're just incredible people that I love working with, and they really get it, and they are just really supportive of, writing a very particular book and letting it be what the book is, as compared to writing a very kind of bland or milquetoast book. They saw what this book was and encouraged it, and it would not be what it is without them.
I love that, and I love that you said the word milquetoast. I haven't heard that since a Hulk, Incredible Hulk comic from the '60s. So good when he talks about Banner. That's so good. No, and I think that's it's really impactful too, because it opens the idea to, this is a character you're going to read about, and she's going to be vulnerable, and she probably doesn't want to be vulnerable. And I feel like that opens a door to sort of understanding what Iscott is all about.
Yeah, the Jedi in this instance, we don't get the idea that they did a lot of like therapy type exercises or speak your truth or be real open. It was more of a, just be, I mean, I think we see this maybe in, I don't know, they were,
it's with the Anakin too.
Monks that get into transcendental meditation. They're the kind of monks that self-flagellate,
Yes. Yeah. Like in Da Vinci Code. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I want to thank you so much, Delilah. It's been a sincere delight. I know we've seen each other in passing over the years of celebrations of Galaxy's Edge, things like that. Actually, I remember seeing you at the opening of Galaxy's Edge, which, of course, you helped give Galaxy's Edge one of the coolest characters ever, who I got to get a picture with over the summer. So thank you so much for that, by the way.
Oh man. Well, I mean, it's, Phasma was written, it was done. And right before it went to print, they asked if they could change her name and use her in the parks. And of course I was like, you're Disney, you can do whatever you want, but how sweet of you to ask me permission. And I was like, yeah, sure. I give you permission. Because her name was originally Amaka Marathi and they changed it to Vi. And I was immediately like, oh no, now the two main characters are Vi and Sif. How did they choose a name so close to this other one? But that's what we ended up with. And then she showed up in the park and I've met her and it's like meeting Snuffleupagus because she's real and it's amazing.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
what can you share? Obviously, you're very, very busy. Thank you again for sharing your talent with us, because I think it's great because of what you've done for Star Wars, and I think you're helping people learn how to be better writers as well. So what can you share about future projects?
Well, I've got 2 more books out this year. They are not Star Wars related, but here, I think they're actually right here. I don't know if you have a video for folks,
yes.
But Midnight at the Houdini is a sweet YA romance that's inspired by Sleep No More in New York and Shakespeare's The Tempest. Cool. So it has really nothing to do with Star Wars. So if you like sweet magical romances or have a teen in your life, that's a good one. And then right under it is Bloom, which is a horror novella that I call Cottagecore Girl Hannibal, because my 16-year-old daughter watched the Hannibal show and was like, why are all of the cool serial killers boys? And I was like, let me write you a book.
How cool is that?
Yeah, so those are out this fall. You can always find me online at Delilah S. Dawson is who I am on Twitter and Instagram, and now Bluesky too. If you want to keep up with what I have going on or talk to me, Twitter. I'm not going to call it X. I refuse to do that. But for the hopeful future, that's the place where I've always been open to interacting with people, asking questions or answering questions that are asked in good faith about publishing. So there's lots of ungoogleable questions. Don't say like, how do I get published? If you have a very specific question, I'll help you. Or if you want to talk Star Wars, I'm there. And then Instagram. But yeah, I'll always have more and more books coming out, and hopefully one day some more Star Wars, because every day I get an email and it makes I'm like, maybe it's Star Wars. Only happened 3 times, but that's fine.
Hey, and three great creations as well. Thank you again, Delilah, so much for being on Coffee with Kenobi.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here. Move along.